News Talk, AM 760 everywhere on iHeartRadio and the iHeartRadio app. At 760radio.com. Mark Larson here. Good to have you back with us every day from 10 to noon here. Happy and honored to have Dr. Harrison Jack Schmidt with us, Apollo 17 astronaut. Among other things, I'm sure just thrilled beyond belief to be appearing with me as your friendly host and MC on stage. Out of all the things you've done, Jack, I'm sure that was right up there with one of them on your list.
Well, it certainly is delightful, that's for sure.
We had a great weekend. It was fun to, out of other things, kind of keep an eye on the Falcon 9 launch and get your commentary as that was going on Saturday night after the event. But first, before we talk about the Artemis launch and the scrub today and the fact that here you are not only having tremendous experience, history making as a geologist, a pilot, astronaut, administrator, businessman, author, U.S. Senator, but in 1972, almost 50 years ago, there you were in the Valley of Torres-Littrow on the moon as the only scientist, geologist there, the last of 12 men to step on the moon during Apollo. So I want to get to that, but I also want to touch on just how great it was to be at that event because of the scholars in the room, wasn't it? I mean, you were the keynote speaker, but having Christina Cook there, who may very well be the first woman to walk on the moon as you did, pretty mind-boggling, isn't it?
Well, it was a great event. The Astronaut Scholarship Foundation is a group that has now grown and growing rapidly through the years to assist qualified students, highly qualified students, as you recognized, at getting the kind of education that future technological advances in the free world are going to require.
You know, in your keynote the other night, one of the things that struck me is where you talked about all the rocks that came back from the missions. It's something like, 800 pounds total, if I remember right, and a lot of those from Apollo 17. And you mentioned how there was such foresight to essentially freeze them and expecting there would be future technological advances. And now here we are, where they're starting to have all these new techniques to go back and really dig into the hows and whys and what else do we learn from some of the trailblazing things you did back in the day.
Well, there's no question that that foresight by NASA advisors as well as NASA was extremely important because in 50 years, the kind of analytical technology that has developed in geochemistry and other fields is just remarkable. And now, after a couple of years of since the release of those samples by NASA, we have begun to see new things that we just wouldn't have been able to see at all 50 years ago. For example, we can examine the core tubes and the rocks themselves using X-rays now, get inside, look inside these samples, and be able to plan the strategy for analysis much, much better than we could in the past.
I know that when Artemis is finally successful, and obviously they scrubbed it today, but that's not the first time things have been scrubbed for safety and make sure everything's absolutely right. But by Artemis 3, if all goes well, in the next couple of years or so, humans could be back on the moon, and it's a whole different way of doing things. The orbit's way different. They're going to a different part of the moon where they'll be doing a lot of geology again. What do they hope? What are we going to be finding? What do they hope to find there? Part of it involves frozen water, doesn't it?
Well, once we do indeed land near the South Pole, we have the opportunity, almost certainly, to sample the ice and other solid volatiles that are there in these very, very cold traps. The temperature of these so-called permanently shadowed areas of the moon get down to 40 degrees Kelvin. That's 40 degrees above absolute zero temperature. So it's a very, very different environment for sampling, for operations. The lighting changes very rapidly. So there are a number of new challenges that the Artemis program will have to face. I just published in Aviation Week an op-ed piece where I suggested that they might consider that the first 2 or 3 Artemis human landings be at somewhat less challenging locations. So another generation of controllers, another generation of astronauts, managers, can get their feet wet in slightly less challenging operations than are required for the south pole of the moon.
Talking with Harrison Schmitt, who was not only Dr. Schmitt, but 12th man on the moon. There were 12. He's one of 4 still with us here, and the only geologist, that scientist to be there with all this. And that's where all of this is going now. And obviously, there's also the gateway to go back to the moon, to get to beyond, to Mars, and whatever else will be doable, if you will, when technology allows. You write scientific papers. You're out on the university circuit a lot. I mean, you mentioned Aviation Week. I'm looking forward to that. As a subscriber, I'll eagerly read that when it's appearing. But what are you seeing in terms of what this Artemis focus now, and all of the other competitors, the ones working with NASA like SpaceX and Blue Origin? It does seem like it's tapping into to a new level of excitement, right? I don't know if it's the same kind of excitement when going up against the Russians, although the Chinese are out there now playing the part of the Russians in the space race. But what are you seeing in the campus settings and the scientific community when it comes to this, where we go now?
Well, in the scientific community, they're looking forward very much to not only sampling the solid volatiles that we talked about previously, but also South Pole landing puts you in a position to sample material that has been thrown from the South Pole Aiken Basin on the far side of the moon. That basin is 2,500 kilometers in diameter, is probably the second largest basin on the moon, the first being the Procol Harum Basin on the near side. And we just would be an opportunity to not only sample some materials from the far side of the moon in great detail, but also to sample materials that have come from fairly deep within the moon. That basin, South Pole Aiken Basin, is about 12 kilometers below the mean lunar radius. So it is an exciting prospect. Certainly, ultimately, a far side landing almost certainly will go to that basin. The other aspect of the science, of course, is to just broaden our perspective on the composition of the moon. Most people don't realize that when we study the moon, we're really studying the early history of the solar system and indeed of the Earth itself, a period of extreme violence and a period in which life began. So life began in the violence of impacts on the Earth in the presence of water, which is the big contrast between the Earth and the moon. Otherwise, they're approximately the same composition. But the presence of water on Earth almost certainly was responsible for the organization of complex organic molecules and ultimately the origin of life.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking with Dr. Harrison Schmitt, who happens to be the lunar module pilot on America's I always like to say not the last, but the most recent mission to the moon on Apollo 17. When you hear some of the same calls now, it always boils down to budgets and what they do in D.C., and you had the extra pleasure, I'm sure, of serving in the U.S. Senate to see how the budgeting works in the belly of the beast. But there's always that debate, and I've already seen over this last weekend, even before the first attempted launch of Artemis this morning, some people saying, well, maybe we should spend more money here on Earth. It's like, well, that shows real ignorance, doesn't it? Your thoughts on that? Because it's always about the money, isn't it?
Well, it is about the money, but it's also about the historical perspective and the future perspective of our leadership. And I'm afraid that we still have not fully admitted to ourselves the kind of challenge that China represents. It is at least equal to that of the former Soviet Union and maybe even greater because of their very, very strong commitment to communism, which, again, is something that I don't think this country will survive if they tend to dominate deep space. They have made it very clear publicly that they intend to try to dominate not only nearer space eventually, but the moon itself. And they're quite interested in the resources of the moon, particularly one that you can bring back to Earth and fuel fusion power plants.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that up there potentially anyway. I remember back in the day as a young kid, there was a talk about, look what the Soviet Union's doing and the moon's going to be red. And that really hasn't changed. And like you say, if anything, the motivation from China's government right now is beyond that because they don't, we don't know how many scrubbed anything that they have. They don't exactly do bulletins sometimes, but intel can show that as well. Um,
Well, you can hope that the intelligence community is wiser than I am
Yeah,
of the
well,
intent.
I don't know about that. You're a pretty smart guy, Jack. So, I mean, I just feel smarter sitting next to you too, like these scholars, because it really is so fascinating, and history makes a big difference when it comes to this. Unfortunately, there's so much of a push now to be extra woke and erase some history, and unfortunately, some of the PR over the years, sometimes from NASA, has not exactly been. When people say, "Well, we just went to the moon, and did we go more than once?" Or, what did we do in the space station? Didn't we take laundry back and forth? Or, people just don't have a clear understanding. It's not being taught, which brings me to a different question that's kind of related to this. Politically speaking, since you were a U.S. Senator from New Mexico, um, and Apollo 17 astronaut, so far, I know the jury's out on this, but is the Biden administration or the Trump administration better for what we're talking about here in terms of bold space? Let's, learn what we need to learn, and let's use it for the good.
Well, I think just looking at the record that the Trump administration made it very clear that they were interested in pursuing the Artemis program very vigorously, and I think the jury's still out on whether the Biden administration is going to do that. We'll just have to see. And of course, it depends on convincing Congress not only to fund what is requested by NASA in order to do the technical job, but as we talked before, I think, Mark, one thing that made Apollo so successful is that Jim Webb, the administrator of NASA in the Kennedy administration, insisted that he have a management reserve of funding so that difficulties like we see today with the rocket do not result in a long-term delay of schedule. And that's what management reserves do. They let you deal with the management risk that comes from doing very complex technological endeavors.
I know you're not out there like an engineer on the launch pad right now, at pad 39B, but they have a window to launch if all things come together and they get the glitches fixed from today on Friday, then again on Monday. If it's something they can't fix on the pad, they got to take it back to the VAB, the giant assembly building. What's your hunch, knowing what you know? How do you think that plays out?
I just don't know enough about the issue. All I see is what's been published and some statements from NASA that they're still evaluating what their basic issues are. If it has to go back if they have to take the SLS, the Space Launch System, back into the vehicle assembly building, then you're going to see a delay of some weeks, I suspect.
Yeah, it takes a long time to roll that thing back to the VAB as well. Jack Schmitt with us, Harrison Schmitt, Dr. Schmitt, who's Apollo 17 lunar module pilot, and as vital as ever, really making a difference in science and exploration, and certainly your geologist know-how on all fronts. What do you hope that today's generation and those moving forward get from all of this?
Well, I hope they realize that a very broad technical, mathematical, and historical education is extraordinarily important to their future and to the country's future. Our education system has, in fact, degenerated for the large part over the last 50 years. The Apollo generation was the beneficiary of great preparation as well as motivation. Preparation in a school system that generally looked at teaching critical thinking, at true knowledge of facts, and unfortunately that has been changed and diluted by the current educational elite that run the public education system and to some degree the private education system. Certainly the universities are not cooperating and not participating in the teaching of critical thinking and true knowledge. So that's the biggest challenge for current generations, is to repair that education system, repair what they have learned, continue to learn in as broad a spectrum of subjects as they possibly can, underpinned primarily by mathematics.
Amen to all that. Dr. Harrison Schmitt, Apollo 17 astronaut, legend, inspirational as always, and I know if you were given a chance and all things added up, you'd go back again. Although you'd have to sell Teresa on that. See how that works out.
Well, no, it's not. Don't have to sell her. She has to go with me.
Oh, well, problem solved. All right, Jack. Thank you. Stay safe. Thanks, buddy. Take care, Dr. Jack Schmidt, Harrison Schmidt. People hear Harrison. Is that Harrison Ford? No, this is, look him up. Google him. San Diego's Talk, AM 760. Did you know that our iHeartRadio Music Festival is back? September 23rd and 24th at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. 2 nights, 1 stage. While the world is listening on iHeartRadio, you could be there. Free chances every weekday to win your trip for 2, plus $1,000 in spending money. All the info at iHeartRadio.com/festival. 800-760-5362 is our number. You excited about the possibilities of where we're going in space next? Or are you saying, spend it on something here, like pay for my college? Is that what it is? 800-760-5362. 800-760-5362. NASA's part of the problem. We alluded to this talking to astronaut Harrison Schmidt in the last segment from Apollo 17. That the PR apparatus has not been through 135 space shuttle missions. Often the word would be like, well, there goes the shuttle crew. They're heading back to the International Space Station. And one time they were taking the treadmill or some bit that Stephen Colbert, back when he was funny, they were setting up the Stephen Colbert treadmill. Like, oh, that's a big deal. They're going to go up and they're going to change the oil and they're going to bring up a new window. And that was it. Every one of those missions, if you ever want to do something that'll make you smarter automatically than most members of Congress, just start Googling the shuttle missions, STS-1 all the way through 135. And again, we're talking about the Artemis launch today, which was scrubbed because part of the reason was they were stressed. That was mentioned by NASA earlier. They were pushed so hard to get it right, like every mission, but there's a whole new generation there now. They don't know what some of the earlier pioneers did and what they learned. They learned as much as they can from it. But when you're in it, it is a crucible. It is a hot environment because if you hear these countdowns, and I've been to several launches over the years, sometimes when they get scrubbed, some of the shuttle missions got scrubbed a lot. There was one, and I forget which number it was, but they were scrubbed, I think 5 times. It's not a bad thing. You learn something from that and you fix it. Now the question is, can they launch on Friday? And I think the launch window on Friday is around 9 in the morning, something like that. And again, the plan is after this mission, which is without humans on board, but with with the mannequins, they fit up to 4 in the Orion capsule. They have like 1,000 sensors to test the stress on these mannequins. That'll be everything but the actual human component. And then splashdown is supposed to happen here off the coast of San Diego after 42 days, something like that. So NASA is saying...
That was STS-127.
127 was the...
Scrubbed 5 times.
Scrubbed 5 times. I think that's Kristen Fisher, who used to be at Fox, who's on CNN, who's like the space expert. She's really good. And her dad, medical doctor, was on that flight. That's how I remember that somewhere back in my brain cells. But anyway, I think it's well worth it. I mentioned this earlier, to see the crowds that showed up on the Space Coast there at Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral, Port Canaveral, Melbourne, and see where the future is going, to spend some time with Christina Cook, who could be the first woman on the moon. She's an active astronaut now. Google her when you're at it. That's Cook, which is Koch. But this is what America does best, and they're making a big deal about it. This is international. It's not just about America, because there's a component on Artemis that is the European something like behind the Orion capsule. But you got a lot of companies involved. It's a big deal for Boeing, but they've also had some delays. And you never want to push a launch. Lesson is, if they had did it this morning. I mean, first of all, they're concerned about the weather. The weather opened up and it was fine right about launch time, which was scheduled 5:33 our time. We were talking about this, covering this on a special YouTube video on San Diego Air and Space Museum YouTube. That should be posted there now. Check that out. Jim Kidrick, the CEO, and I were hosting this, and we had the legendary flight controllers, Gene Kranz, with the vest and the crew cut, Jerry Griffin, and Milt Windler. And they were talking about what they know, what they learned, what was going on all the way up to the scrub. And they'd been plenty of times stuff didn't happen. When they pushed it.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office.
More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
The Salvation Army is dedicated to meeting human needs wherever, whenever, and however they can. Every year, they show more than 25 million Americans love beyond poverty. Your donations help families in need this holiday season and all year long.
Job loss, hunger, the inability to pay bills. These realities force many Americans to choose between basic necessities and can often mean the difference between home and homeless.
In fact, 15% of home renters are behind on housing payments and may face eviction. The Salvation Army provides rent and mortgage assistance to those in need in your local community.
Show your neighbors love beyond dilemmas this holiday season by dialing pound 250 on your phone and saying the keyword Salvation Army at the prompt. You'll have the opportunity to receive a one-time auto-dialed text message from iHeartMedia that links to a donation form. The Salvation Army, love beyond homelessness. Dial pound 250 and say Salvation Army.
It got ugly. While you're Googling, check out Apollo 1. That happened on the launch pad. They're doing what was supposedly a routine test, and then suddenly 3 of our best and brightest astronauts were dead on the launch pad, on the test pad. 1967. Then it looked like it was over. Then it wasn't. Then you're go, and they're just doing a phenomenal amount of work going to the moon, landing successfully 6 times, and then all of a sudden, pushing into the space shuttle. And then the Challenger explosion. And then February 1st of, 2003, Columbia breaks up with a technological failure over Texas. One of the most moving things that I go and see every time I'm at the Kennedy Space Center, and I was there to see this on Saturday, is a panel off of the Challenger, and then there's the windshield from Columbia that were retrieved, and they're in this very kind of reverent display. It's really moving. And then there's a big tribute to all the astronauts who gave everything, sacrificed their lives. They didn't plan on doing it, but it's always a risk in any of these things. So you never want to push it. Just like when you're flying airplanes. You never bleep with the weather, as my instructor and buddy Joe Graham said. Rule number 1, never bleep with the weather. So as I was flying back Orlando and changing planes in Houston yesterday, I heard people on Southwest. By the way, Southwest is still a great airline. And you're packed in there. It's a cattle call, but at least they have a sense of humor. People saying, "Oh, come on, you're inconvenienced me." Well, it'd be very inconvenient as they launch into a thunderstorm. They did that with Apollo 12. NASA did. Seemed like a good idea. Got struck by lightning and lost power. And then they figured out a quick fix. That's what happens when you push it, as opposed to saying, let's think this way. Let's think it through. Your thoughts, 800-760-5362, or you can press that red microphone button on the talkback button thing there, and you're listening live on the iHeartRadio app. San Diego's Talk, AM 760. One other thing on the whole issue of things that you launch into space, in this case, the giant Artemis rocket this morning, it boiled down to, again, the sequence was weather, don't bleep with the weather, the lightning, and then that clears out, and then all of a sudden there's the issue, there's a hydrogen leak, they fix that. There's no small undertaking. You got just hundreds of people working on this, and then there's what's this crack on the main tank? The kind of orange tank. That's the orange is it's a substance they put on there to keep everything chilled, keep it cold, and it's like a thermo insulating goop. But they thought they saw a crack in it, and of course that takes you back to some of the problems with the shuttles. They get that done. They said, that's fine. So we go with that. And then all of a sudden they say, well, we got a problem with this engine, the fueling of an engine. So there are 4 engines on this, and they're the engines like you remember seeing on all those space shuttle missions. When you see them on the launch pad and they move around, and as they're getting ready to go, those same engines. So they had some of those engines that were still left around. So they used those engines, put them on the big tank. That's essentially what there was, with the same solid rocket booster. So it looks a lot like the shuttle on steroids. And they had some shuttle stuff. And so now there's a debate, why are they using all that stuff? Well, that's not unusual. But I guess there was also a test. I'm not sure if that was the problem or one of the earlier ones. I think it was one of the engine, because the weather was so rough down there. And trust me, it was. I was at Kennedy on Saturday, and the lightning was just ferocious. This is going to be fun. These storms usually come through in Florida, and they're out in, if it rains in Florida, you got to wait 10 minutes, it'll be gone. They just kept coming. It was heavy rain and then lots of lightning. So, but because of all that, they apparently weren't able to do one of those tests. So some of that was like learning the hard way this morning, even with all the best preparation. So there will be a debate. Why do you use some of the other stuff? Well, the whole idea, that's not unusual. It's kind of the thing now to reuse everything. The rockets are coming back from SpaceX, and NASA's moving in a lot of that direction as well, working with them and Blue Origin and so forth. So, but they'll get it done. The question is, will they do it on Friday? Will they do it on Monday? If not, or if they can't fix that engine issue on the launch pad, then they got to roll that back with that crawler that goes so slowly. It takes about 3 days to get it all back in the garage, if you will. What's called the VAB, Vertical Assembly Building, or Vehicle Assembly Building, whatever you like. That's where they built the Saturn V's, and assembled them and take them out there and get them all fueled up. And so they use the same historic launch pad. You do not want to launch into disaster. So I'm all for scrubbing it. I'm just glad I wasn't there today. I just thought if I stay, then they'll scrub it. So now that's blown that paradigm. And Jack Schmidt was with us, the Apollo 17, the 12th man on the moon out of the 12 human beings who were there, and he was lunar module pilot back in December of 72. But he didn't stay for the launch either. Neither did flight director legend Jerry Griffin, because Jerry didn't want to stay because the traffic was too bad. But he was with all the Apollo launches. But you never want to rush it, never want to push it. If you're on an airline going someplace, you never want to say, I wish the pilot would just take off in this storm anyway. Not if you want to live necessarily. Just something to think about. Meanwhile, the national networks, they're not sure what to do with all this because they covered it and then they don't know what they're talking about part of the time. But the big obsession now is, you had Lindsey Graham, the senator who is not one of my favorites. Yeah, he's Republican sometimes. But he said something on one of the weekend talk shows, I was doing on Fox, and he said there will be riots in the streets if Trump is prosecuted. Not exactly the best thing to say if you want to keep calm. But at the same time, he said it. So you can say all kinds of crazy stuff if you're on the left. You can be, who's it, Val Demings from Florida. They have ads running, I saw in Florida on this, reminding of some of the greatest hits, where she said it's a beautiful thing when the riots were going on after George Floyd back in 2000, COVID season 1. She said, it's a beautiful thing. We should admire these people. And Kamala Harris said, there's going to be more. And now it's like, Lindsey Graham said something. There might be riots in the streets. See, they love that. Lindsey shouldn't have said that. Not sure which side he's on sometimes when it comes to this, but you know how that all works. So maybe it's some sort of strategy. So the networks will obsess on that. One thing that they haven't done, and now they're saying Trump is also calling for an uprising. Because he was on, did you do this on social media, on Truth Social? Trump encourages FBI agents to go nuts and not take it anymore over Mar-a-Lago raid. The people, because there are extremes in any organization, every organization, and then there's rational people going, I can't stand what's going on here. I've actually talked to some people within the FBI who don't like in recent years how things have been run. And these are fine, upstanding people. So you got to be careful not to broad brush everybody. But Trump didn't use the word, the R word, but let's see, here's Mediaite.com on this. Trump appeared to call for the seemed to call for the rank and file of the FBI to revolt. A lot of this is revolting, but thank you. A revolt against its leadership over the seizure of classified documents. And we had John Bolton on with us, former national security advisor to Trump, and he's no big Trump fan. But he said when he was on with us in the first hour today, that you can hear it on the podcast at 760radio.com. He said that the opposition here, the anti-Trump side, may overplay their hand for the third time. They had the 2 impeachments. And I don't think we're ever going to know what was in those documents. I think they get to a point where it continues to hang so you can keep the narrative going like, remember, the FBI had to raid his house because national security. Can we see it? No, you can't see it. Let's run that footage again. Show the orange man. I'm not here to defend Trump, but I want to defend truth. So he put out this affidavit on Friday. Did you see what Trump did, by the way, baiting him on Truth Social? It was Friday or Saturday. The post was something, I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but it said something like they missed one. And they had a document that was all redacted with the heavy-duty Sharpie lines. And then the only words that were revealed were "Make America Great Again." He doesn't know how to stir them. And the affidavit says things like, there's probable cause to believe the evidence of obstruction will be found. And now here's some of our evidence. No, you can't see it. It's a serious crime, if that's what it is. Hey, if it's there, then prosecute them. But they're being really, it would jeopardize the investigation, would it? Or would it reveal how stupid and how political this is? We don't know. We're going to talk with longtime political expert, controversial Dick Morris, about this time tomorrow, about all this. He says, hey, Trump's got this in the bag. He's coming back, no doubt about it. Right? I'm not sure that I agree with that. But Trump goes on Truth Social yesterday, his own personal banned from Twitter version of social media. And he said when where's the quote here? When are the great agents and others in the FBI going to say, we aren't going to take it anymore? It's like Howard Beale in Network. I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore. Much as they did when James Comey read off a list of all the crooked Hillary Clinton crimes only to say no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute, Trump said. That's true. That happened. It's only 33,000 emails. Nothing to see here. And then Trump continued in his posting yesterday, said the wonderful people of the FBI went absolutely nuts, so Comey had to backtrack and do a fake investigation, all caps, in order to keep them at bay. The end result, we won in 2016 and did much better in 2020. Well, was the final result. But now the left has lost their minds. So that is now spun by the national media that Trump is trying to have an uprising. They want people to go to the street. And then Lindsey Graham adds to it by going, well, if you prosecute them, there'd be riots in the streets. That's as bad as when you hear that from the left. Not responsible. But it would help if the American people had more clarity on this, not less. But I don't think they want that. It's like January 6th. January 6th seems like that's really over, doesn't it? Unless that's what they're looking for, some smoking gun about January 6th. Well, they'll find a way to work it in so they can run the footage again. Run the video of the guy climbing the front of the Capitol. Let's run that again. Don't show the guy who shot the woman from San Diego and that still has unanswered questions. Let's not even talk about that. San Diego's Talk, AM 760. I mentioned earlier that iHeartRadio has launched the first of its kind state-of-the-art, always-on entertainment space where music and gaming collide. It's like a Big Bang Theory thing. It's iHeartLand. iHeartLand available now in Fortnite. Experience concerts, events, and more from your favorite artists and podcasts. And, iHeart knows how to do this stuff really, right? So figure it out. You just go and check it out online, iHeartRadio.com/Fortnite. And, of course, the iHeartRadio Music Festival comes up next month in Las Vegas, September 23rd and 24th. And we're giving away chances every day for you to win a trip for two plus $1,000 in spending money. Now, that's better, much better than the MTV Awards last night, which I happened to watch for a little bit. And then I could smell my brain cells going. It apparently ranked, sure did, in some areas as the most crude so far, because the thing is to just talk about controversial stuff. Nicki Minaj, who's a great talent, said something, and I think it was on the departure of the show, have a great, suddenly she became a gynecologist, what she said. So there were things on that where everybody tried to get extra edgy and gross and make their political statements and all of that. Comedian Billy Eichner, you familiar with his work? He's a guy who's hysterically funny. During his segment, before announcing a performance by pop artist Panic at the Disco, which is a great, some of their music, he's known for his show Billy on the Street. Took a moment to plug his new LGBTQ rom-com movie, Bros. So he did that, as artists would normally do, by berating conservative justices on the Supreme Court. I love when these people talk passionately about things about which they know nothing. Here's a little segment.
Now listen up. Some of you know me as Billy on the Street. But on September 30th, I have a movie coming out called Bros. Bros is making history as the first gay rom-com ever made by a major studio. And the first where every role is played by an openly LGBTQ actor. Right? And I need you all there in theaters on September 30th because we need to show all the homophobes like Clarence Thomas and all the homophobes on the Supreme Court that we want gay love stories and we support LGBTQ people. And we are not letting them drag us back into the last century because they are in the past and Bros is the future.
Okay, I don't recall ever going to a movie saying, well, before I enjoy this movie, I wonder who's gay, who's straight, who's this, who's that. I don't care. And by the same token, sometimes fellow people who happen to be right of center will say, well, Mark Larson, how can you have talk with so-and-so? Because don't you know they are this or that, or they are far to the left or whatever. I don't care. They're still interesting. People say, another point, it's a little dated, but it makes a point, like Barbara Streisand. Great talent. Horrible politics. Was it Laura Ingraham who wrote the book Shut Up and Sing? Which is, it's her right as an American to say it. That was controversial. How dare you? It's anti-woman. What's a woman saying that about another woman? There's just too and the ignorance on other issues is just amazing. I guess some people, is that what they think? They think that if you are anywhere to the right of center, first of all, you want people to die from COVID. You obviously voted for Trump. You want to go climb the walls in the Capitol, and you want to pollute the earth. Have I missed anything on the list? That's what the assumption is. And then you ask them about some common sense things. They have no clue. I'm all for green energy. How are you going to do that? I have a place to plug in. I have sockets. Let's go all electric. By the way, it's getting hot today. Speaking of the power in California, with all these edicts aplenty and no gas-powered vehicles by 2035 in their fantasy land. San Diego County will experience potentially dangerous heat wave tomorrow through Labor Day. Enjoy. Worst conditions are going to be on Saturday. That's when SDSU will be out at Snapdragon Stadium. Is that real turf or artificial turf? I forget. Is it
It's grass.
It's grass. Well, that'll help the heat then. A little better than. The National Weather Service has issued an excessive heat watch that will go into effect. This is a lot hotter than the MTV awards. Goes into effect tomorrow morning, lasts until at least Sunday, and maybe through Monday when the Padres begin a home stadium homestand at Petco. It's going to be nasty. 110 to 115 in the deserts. Going to be up to 105 in places like Valley Center, Escondido, Ramona, Poway, Alpine, Hamul, probably parts of El Cajon. Mountains could hit the 90s. Weather Service forecaster was saying we're going to have very high daytime temperatures, warm nights. So it'll be tomorrow midday when the independent system operator says, we're giving it all you got. We can't keep the lights on. You need to flex. Not your muscles, but flex your power. That's where they turn around and say, you need to do this because you are using too much electricity because you don't want to pass out in your own house because you want to run your air conditioning. And be viable and keep mental clarity so you can work and make a living. It's your fault. Buy some other stuff. Same thing with the water crisis. Never let a crisis go to waste. That's what you get.